Why should I feel discouraged? And why should the shadows come? Why should my heart feel lonely and long for heaven and home? When Jesus is my portion, a constant friend is he. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. God's eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing because I'm happy, and I sing because I'm free. God's eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I know he watches me. Yeah, I just had to get that one out this morning. It has been really just ringing through my spirit since I woke up this morning. And I couldn't figure out why. I was like, why is this song, I'm not sad or anything like that, but why is this song just keeps rolling through my spirit, man? And then I opened up my news feed and I was like, yeah, God was probably trying to prepare me, because I was really not expecting to wake up to news that acclaimed author, many times over award winner, Toni Morrison has died. Yeah, my spirit was already trying to, thank you, Lady Barbara. Yeah, my spirit was already trying to comfort me. That's a whole word right there. My spirit was already trying to comfort me before my mind caught up with what was going to encounter today. So we say rest in heaven, rest on to Toni Morrison. The cause of her passing is not known at this time, but I think most people are shocked. But here's the thing again, and I think we talked about this. I'm not sure if I talked about it in my coaching session or not, but I think I might have covered it here yesterday. I think I did, yes. When Oprah was talking about the universe, right? And when your soul feels as if it's done everything it can do and is supposed to do, she said it's almost like us telling the universe that I'm done, that there's nothing else for me to do. And recently this year, Toni Morrison released her documentary of her life on, the things that she wanted to share about her life. She released her documentary this year in her own words. So she got an opportunity to tell her own story, which is something that we talk about every now and then here. she got the opportunity to write her own story. She got the opportunity to tell her own story in her words. And I think that's a very important lesson for all of us. Some of us think we have more time than we do. And when God is putting an unction on you to write things, or he's putting a desire in your heart for you to get things out or get things completed, I don't think that that is just a random feeling, right? I think that he does prompt us to complete things in our life that are necessary for us to put out into the world, because we don't know the exact time we're leaving here. We don't know the exact hour that we're leaving here. Rarely will you come across someone who knows it's their time to depart. There are a few people, my great-grandfather for one, I was told of how he knew it was his time to depart, and he went to his rocking chair and sat down and closed his eyes, and he was gone. But everybody doesn't get that time of departure notice. So because we do not, it is best to do what we can, while we can, when we can, how we can, with the people God has told us to do it with, for as long as we can. So, yeah. So I wanted to see if I could pull up again, because I was reading some things about Toni Morrison this morning. I wanted to pull up her quotes again, some of her quotes that I thought were pretty powerful. For those of you who are with me for the first time, I am Shantae Charles. This is Daring Dialogues. And today is Black Table Talk, where we talk all things Black history, Black people, Black news. The news at the top of the hour is that beloved writer Toni Morrison is dead at 88. And we want to read some of her quotes, some of her best quotes here. There's a couple of sites that have them. I know CNN has a series of them that I just put up, that I put up on Black Table Talk page. But these are from Newsweek. This is one of my favorite ones. I didn't realize that she sort of had the same sentiments that I have had in terms of writing until after I had finished my novel series. I came across this quote, and she said, if there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. That was kind of like one of the launching pads for me becoming a writer. Is I was reading so many books that did not tell the story of Black love the way I have seen and experienced it, that did not tell the story of Black love from a godly standpoint, that did not tell the story of Black love from a multiracial standpoint, the way that I wanted to tell it. And so, because I saw that there was a void in that particular area, that's one of the reasons that I chose to write my novel series, Church Love. I chose to showcase the beauty of Black love, the beauty of Black culture, not just here in America, but also the beauty of the Caribbean culture as well. So you would have to read my stories to understand what I'm talking about. But I wanted to showcase Blackness and not just the cookie cutter stereotype version of what Black love is supposed to be. So I didn't see that book yet, so I wrote it. Another one of her quotes comes from her book, Beloved, and it reads, freeing yourself was one thing, claiming ownership of that freed self was another. She also said, in this country, American means white. Everyone else has to hyphenate. From her book, Jazz, Don't ever think I fell for you or fell over you. I didn't fall in love. I rose in it. Another quote by Toni Morrison. At some point in life, the world's beauty becomes enough. You don't need to photograph, paint, or even remember it. It is enough. Another quote. Love is or it ain't. Thin love ain't love at all. Another powerful quote from her book, Song of Solomon. You can't own a human being. You can't lose what you don't own. Suppose you did own him. Could you really love somebody who was absolutely nobody without you? You really want somebody like that? Somebody who falls apart when you walk out the door? You don't, do you? And neither does he. You're turning over your whole life to him. Your whole life, girl. And if it means so little to you that you can just give it away, hand it to him, then why should it mean any more to him? He can't value you more than you value yourself. Preach, Toni Morrison. This quote comes from The Bluest Eye. Along with the idea of romantic love, she was introduced to another, physical beauty. Probably the most destructive ideas in the history of human thought. Both originated in envy, thrived in insecurity, and ended in disillusion. This is a powerful one. The function of freedom is to free someone else. Let that marinate. Three more. As you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. As you enter positions of trust and power, dream a little before you think. Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined. Last one. I tell my students, when you get these jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, you need to free somebody else. If you have some power, then your job is to empower somebody else. This is not just a grab bag candy game. Woo! All right, one more. Toni Morrison on love. You think because he doesn't love you that you are worthless. You think that because he doesn't want you anymore that he is right, that his judgment and opinion of you are correct. If he throws you out, then you are garbage. You think he belongs to you because you want to belong to him. Don't. It's a bad word, belong. Especially when you put it with somebody you love. Love shouldn't be like that. Did you ever see the way the clouds love a mountain? They circle all around it. Sometimes you can't even see the mountain for the clouds. But you know what? You go up top, and what do you see? His head. The clouds never cover the head. His head pokes through because the clouds let him. They don't wrap him up. They let him keep his head high, free, with nothing to hide him or bind him. You can't own a human being. We just read that part, but that was the beginning. You can't own a human being. You can't lose what you don't own. Suppose you did own him. Could you really love somebody who is absolutely nothing without you? Very good question. You really want somebody like that? Somebody who falls apart when you walk out the door? You don't, and neither does he. You're turning over your whole life. And if it means so little to you that you can just give it away, hand it to him, then why should it mean any more to him? He can't value you more than you value yourself. Very powerful quote on love. How many people are covering the heads of their mountains today, boy? Whoo, Lord. Speaking of which, I came across this. I was walking downstairs and I came across this in my library and I totally forgot I had this book. But I want to recommend it to you for those of you who have been empowered by earlier this week by the word on the universe. I want you to check this book out. I'm sure you can probably check it out from your local library of somewhere. But very, very powerful book, awesome book. It's got all sorts of quotes in it from scientists, from people who are believers, from the scriptures, talking about the hand of God. And one of these images was so powerful, I wanted to share it with you today. I accidentally closed the book though. So let me try to get back to it quickly. Where is it? I think I'm coming to it. Yes. Woo, Lord. An image in the universe. Screenshot that and meditate on that. I see several things in here, but I'm not going to tell you what to see. All right? I see a couple things. But every time I see this particular picture, it just makes me say, whoo, my God. God of creation. That particular image is called the Eagle Nebula. The Eagle Nebula. This detail of the famous nebula shows the denser star forming knots. Energetic light from young massive stars causes the gas to glow and boils away part of the dust and gas from its birth pillar. Many of these stars will explode after several million years, returning most of their elements back to the nebula that formed them. This process is forming an open cluster of stars known as MI6, which can be partially seen in the upper right. The Eagle Nebula is about 7,000 light years away in the constellation called Serpens. The Eagle Nebula. 7,000 light years away. But you think that just happened? Child, please. All right. We're getting into our books again today. We're going to start with Stamped from the Beginning. We may not get to Spare the Kids today, but we'll see how far we can get. We're going to start with Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America by Ibram X. Kendi. Ibram has a new book coming out. I think it's called The Anti-Racist, or How to Be Anti-Racist. And you know we're going to get it, because clearly we need some lessons on that in America still. How to be anti-racist. We are now in the chapter 9, talking about being created equal. This concept of being created equal, and how the British were laughing at the Americans because they were wondering, how do you all want to demand freedom for us while holding other people enslaved and captive? No comprende. This does not compute. So, we're talking now about Thomas Jefferson and his hypocrisy, and how, you know, he was writing all of these things about independence, but at the same time, he owned slaves, and at the same time, he was sleeping with, or in today's vernacular, he was, in short, he was a pedophile. This girl was in her teens, and he had created this secret room that they have now dug up, by the way, at Monticello, that was a couple of doors down from his own bedroom. And this room, by the way, has no wall, no windows in it. So it was like a little secret cell that he kept a couple of doors down from his own room, where he was going to get his groove on with a woman who was enslaved, that he wound up having several children from. But he was around here writing, talking about he want his independence, but he was human trafficking. And not only was he human trafficking, he was sex trafficking. in today's terms. Okay? So people had a problem with this, by the way. Even people during his time had a problem with this because he was still in relationship with her, I believe, after his wife passed. And so there were rumors that he was doing this out in Monticello. There was rumors about a girl that he was keeping in this room with no windows. Well, now, because they've unearthed that room, it has actually kind of verified the reports that were happening during his day. All right. So if you have an opportunity this summer, I know we're nearing the closing of summer, but if you have an opportunity and you're in Virginia, go check out Monticello. And they do have a whole tour where you can see the room that she was kept in. All right. After outlining more justifications for independence in his declaration, Jefferson listed the long train of abuses and usurpations by British monopolists, like cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. The inability of American merchants and planters to do business with merchants and planters outside the British Empire had checked their freedoms in buying and selling African people to and from anyone, in buying cheaper or better products from non-British sources, in selling their slave-grown crops and manufactured goods outside of Britannica, and in escaping the subjugation of British merchants and banks. Jefferson and his freedom-fighting class of aspiring international free traders gained a powerful ally in 1766. So, again, when I want people to really get this, because when Dr. Claude Anderson says racism is first economic, he's trying to get us to understand that slaves, that humans were the cash, the capital, and the credit. So to stop them from the slave trade, to restrict them from buying and selling slaves, to restrict them from selling their slave-grown products, was causing serious damage to their quote-unquote way of life. All right? So when you hear them talking in these terms, when you're reading these documents and you hear them talking in these terms about their economics being impeded, they're actually talking about the fact that y'all won't let us buy and sell no slaves no more. You won't let us trade humans anymore. You won't let us sell humans outside of what we're doing over here. Which is why when people say, I don't understand what the difference is between what was going on with the slave trade around the world and what was happening in America, the fact of the matter is, when other people were ending the slave trade and cutting it off, America still kept going. And the way that America chose to keep going is they started breeding the slaves in between each other, because their laws decided that these people are never going to be set free because we make too much money off of this industry. So we're looking to keep it going into perpetuity. And because we can no longer bring more people over, we can no longer kidnap more people and enslave them. Now we have to figure out a new system to keep it going. And that's where you get into the shadow slavery piece of breeding people into slavery. That is wickedness on top of wickedness. So not only are you kidnapping people from their homelands, because you're kidnapping people from their homelands and you're bringing them over here, but now you're going to take it a step further and you're going to start breeding them between each other, which is why when some of you do these DNA testings, you have parts of Africa from all over in your DNA because of the interbreeding they were doing from different tribal areas, okay? They were interbreeding them. And they were breeding the strongest with the strongest, the best with the best. So when you look at some of the genetic abilities of your current African Americans today, and people wonder about the genetic abilities, you have to realize that they were creating new slaves. That's the part people don't want to think about. They were creating these genetically stronger slaves to do their work better. So Jefferson was basically like, you all are stopping us from human trafficking. You don't want to sell our products that was created and harvested through the people that we human trafficked and now we're breeding. And you're stopping our economy. This is not good for us. Scottish philosopher Adam Smith condemned England's trade acts for constraining the quote-unquote free market. What was the free market? The free market was the ability to enslave people and make money off of them. That was the free market. In his bestseller, The Wealth of Nations, which is a very popular book with economists, by the way, a lot of people recommend reading The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. Clearly a racist who had no problem with endorsing the free market of selling human beings. To this founding father of capitalist economics, which was built on slaves, the wealth of nations stemmed from a nation's productive capacity, a productive capacity African nations lacked. Gee, I wonder why they lacked the productive capacity. Maybe because you were stealing their actual human beings from there? All the inland parts of Africa, he scripted, seem in all ages of the world to have been in the same barbarous and uncivilized state in which we find them at present. Let's be clear that when this trade was going on and happening, they were not in a barbarous state. There were kings, there were queens, there were libraries, there were scientists, there were engineers, there were builders. Meanwhile, Smith praised Americans for, quote, contriving a new form of government for an extensive empire, which seems very likely to become one of the greatest and most formidable that ever was in the world. Of course it would become that. When you steal chiefs and warriors and scientists and librarians and agriculturalists from someone else's countries, plural, when you steal them and you bring them to build your nation, your society, of course it's going to be the best in the world. The founding fathers beamed reading Adam Smith's prediction. Jefferson later called Wealth of Nations the best book extant on political economy. Well, of course he would, because this economist was all for the slave trade and what they were doing to other human souls. Jefferson saved the worst of the king's abuses for last in his declaration. Ever the lawyer, ever the wordsmith, he fought back against Samuel Johnson's charge of American hypocrisy. But it was hypocrisy. The English crown, Jefferson wrote, which had prevented Americans from abolishing slavery, was now freeing and arming enslaved Africans to maintain British enslavement over Americans, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which the king urged them to commit against the lives of another. Rhode Island pastor Samuel Hopkins, an anti-slavery Puritan, would have found Jefferson's passage laughable. He had just sent the Congress a dialogue concerning the slavery of the Africans. American so-called enslavement to the British was lighter than a feather compared to Africans' enslavement to Americans, Hopkins argued. The electrifying anti-racist pamphlet nearly overshadowed the Quakers' demand in 1776 for all friends to manumit their slaves or face banishment. So in 1776, hats off to the Quakers. In 1776, the Quakers said, free your slaves or you will be banished from our spiritual community, because you can't be doing both. Hats off to the Quakers. They were before their time. Our education has filled us with strong prejudices against them, Hopkins professed, and led us to consider them not as our brethren or in any degree on a level with us, but as quite another species of animals made only to serve us and our children. Now, what Samuel Hopkins just said as a preacher is still true today. Somebody's not going to like this. Hopkins, as a preacher, as a white preacher, said, our education about the slave has filled us with strong prejudices against them and led us to consider them not as our brethren or in any degree on a level with us, but as quite another species of animals made only to serve us and our children. So in other words, as long as the slave was serving them and their children, it was okay. But as long as you serve us and don't try to be equal with us, or certainly don't try to exceed what we do, you'll be all right. But the moment you try to show yourself as an equal in our society, you're probably going to find yourself either whooped into submission or you're going to find yourself dead. All right. So this was still and is still, unfortunately, a mindset in this country. Hopkins became the first major Christian leader outside of the Society of Friends to forcefully oppose slavery. But he sat lonely on the pew of anti-slavery in 1776. Other preachers stayed away from that pew, and so did the delegates declaring independence. No one had to tell them that their revolutionary avowals were leaking in contradictions. Nothing could persuade slave-holding American patriots to put an end to their inciting proclamations of British slavery or to their enriching enslavement of African people. Forget contradictions, both were in their political and economic self-interest. Self-interest was ruining them then, and self-interest is ruining some people right now. By July 2nd, 1776, the resolution to declare independence had passed. The delegates then peered over Jefferson's draft like barbers over a head of hair. Every time they trimmed, changed, or added something, the hypersensitive Jefferson sank deeper into his chair. Benjamin Franklin, sitting next to him, failed to cheer him up. The delegates cut Jefferson's long passage, calling the English hypocrites. Apparently, delegates from South Carolina and Georgia disliked Jefferson's characterization of slavery as a cruel war against human nature. That language threatened the foundation of their vast estates. The delegates finished making their revisions of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. So that means anything that was in that founding fathers document that condemned slavery, they cut it out. Because they were like, we can't have this in the document and we are slaveholders. So I get a side eye. I turn a side eye at people who keep saying that they are constitutionalists or that they are originalists, meaning people who adhere to the original document. Meaning if you adhere to the original document, you are in essence saying that I'm okay with the document not including black people as free and not including women as having any rights. That's what you're actually saying. Be careful of people who keep telling you that they are a originalist. That's what they're telling you. Moving on to our next book, which is really going to tie into what we just talked about. The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby. The truth about the American church's complicity in racism. Question: are we still complicit today? Absolutely. Absolutely. Are we complicit? Are some of us complicit in what has been going on the last couple of days with shootings? Absolutely. These men who are participating in these shootings are coming out and they're telling you that they are Christians. So if they are Christians, I want to know, what kind of Christianity have they learned? What kind of Christianity have they been taught? What have they been taught about people who are non-white? Because they're the ones who are saying, they're the ones who are self-confessing that they are Christians. So now that begs the question, what kind of Christian are you? What is your doctrine? What do you actually believe about people that are non-white? What do you actually believe about creation? These questions need some answering, because if you're saying you're Christian, but you're going into spaces with automatic weapons and killing people who don't look like you, then I need to know what your definition of Christianity is. So let's take a look at Jemar Tisby's work, and we're looking at the section entitled European Contact with North America. We're not going to get to our third book today because I do want to leave some time for audience response. So let's take a look at this section here. After about 2 months of sailing, Columbus and his bedraggled crew stumbled onto the shores of the Americas in 1492. Of course, Columbus and his men did not walk into uninhabited land. When they arrived, they found a place vibrant with flora and fauna, as well as sophisticated communities of indigenous people who had dwelled there since before written memory. Columbus's band was not even among the first Europeans in North America. Centuries earlier, the Scandinavians made landfall on the northern Atlantic coast in a failed colonization project. Instead, Columbus's arrival represented the beginning of an era of European colonization motivated by profit and predicated on unpaid labor. Now, in my studies, it is said, I've read several different times that it is said that Columbus went in search of the Americas because he was reading other scriptures that are not in the quote-unquote canon of the KJV. He was reading other scriptures that talked about the scattering of certain peoples all over the world. So he was actually in search of the so-called scattered peoples. This is something that is not really talked about in your mainstream history books. The fact that Columbus knew by reading other scriptures that there were people scattered all over the world. So this wasn't just some, I'm going to explore, I'm just going to have an adventure. No, he was in search of certain peoples. All right. So I'm going to tell you, do your own research to find out who he was in search of. Race has been so inscribed into American society that nowadays it is hard to imagine another reality. But in the early decades of European contact with North America, the racial caste system had not yet been developed. Race is a social construct, and I always tell people it's a social construct, but it has very real realities for the people that it was constructed for. So yes, it's not a real concept, but it does have real effects on the people that it was designed for. There is no biological basis for the superiority or inferiority based on the amount of melanin in his or her skin. The development of the idea of race required the intentional actions of people in the social, political, and religious spheres to decide that skin color determined who would be enslaved and who would be free. This is why it does people a disservice to keep calling race and racism a mental illness. It was not a mental illness, and it is not a mental illness because it was a systematic, deliberate, thought out process that took several spheres of life to institute. So please stop calling racism a mental illness. It is not a mental illness. It is a learned doctrine and ideology that people operate from. Okay? And there are specific tenets to it. There's a almost 400-page book called The Negro, a Beast or in the Image of God that was written as doctrine for how to treat people and how to see people as subhuman. I did a whole teaching around it. All right? These are what I call doctrines of devils. This is deliberate attempts to dehumanize people. Now, we can say they're crazy for doing that. We can say they have a mental dysfunction, but that is not a proper definition of mental illness. When people are mentally ill, they do things outside of rationality. No, these people did this within rationality. They made in their mind, they made a rational decision to classify people, to use science and politics and religion and law to codify the fact of people either being enslaved or free based on their skin color. Over time, Europeans, including Christians, wrote the laws and formed the habits that concentrated power in the hands of those they considered white, while withholding equality from those they considered black. So when someone says that whiteness is destroying people, what they're talking about is they're talking about the concept of whiteness. The fact that whiteness has been defined as certain things, as certain skin colors, as certain qualities. That's what they're talking about. The racial attitudes that underlay these ideas formed over time. From the colonial through the revolutionary eras, the racial caste system remained malleable and uneven. European contact with the indigenous peoples here in North America and the importation of Africans to the continent posed questions about how to organize society, and no one at that time had any pre-established answers. Yet, while the contours of American society after European contact had not yet been decided, the explorers were still arriving with pre-formed ideas about the inherent superiority of lighter skin, that is, more European-looking people. One of Columbus's early letters back to Spain compared indigenous and European physical features. He said, quote, "As regards beauty, the Christians or Europeans said there was no comparison, both men and women, and that their skins are whiter than the other indigenous people. They saw two girls whose skins were as white as any that could be seen in Spain." So even then on the continent, there were people of all different shades and hues, and they acknowledged this in their writings. Europeans evaluated the people they encountered in North America based on how similar they were to themselves. This is a common human response when interacting with other groups, but the description in Columbus's letter reveals that colonists equated lighter skin with beauty and desirability long before chattel slavery became the norm. Early reports of European contact with indigenous people demonstrate that the Europeans had missionary ends in mind, but their means and their motivation was questionable. During his first voyage, Columbus wrote, quote, "The indigenous inhabitants should be good servants, not good leaders, good servants, and intelligent. For I observed that they quickly took in what was said to them, and I believed that they would easily be made Christians, as it appeared to me that they had no religion." Now, this is very prideful, arrogant, and assumptive, that just because somebody does not worship like you do, that they don't have a religion. To Columbus and his followers, the people they encountered would make good servants. Indigenous people were not considered intellectual or social equals, but were valued based on their ability to do the will of the European. How well can I make you serve me? That was what their value was based on. Further, in the mind of Columbus and others, indigenous people did not have the sophistication to develop their own religious beliefs. Europeans failed to acknowledge the long-standing, well-developed religious beliefs and practices of the people they met. Instead, they viewed indigenous men and women as a blank slate on which their version of Christianity could be written. This paternalistic view of evangelism still permeates American church history to this day. We still have people trying to go to other indigenous communities saying, let us go save them with our gospel. Now, some people have been surprised and shocked because when they get there, these people already have a vibrant faith going on. And many times the roots are within Hebrew culture, all right? And they're trying to figure out, how do they already have this established? Well, African people on the continent are not a monolith. They were moving all of the time. Many of them were moving from the east over to the west. So you have to take that into consideration. For the next century and a half, European colonists struggled to establish settlements in North America. They faced new climates, they faced disease, starvation, and a short supply of people. For a while, European hegemony over the land's original inhabitants was far from a foregone conclusion. It was not a given that they were going to be able to settle because they were dying. Some of them were not able to handle the climate. Some of them were getting diseases. For instance, historian Richard White refers to the middle ground between the cultures, when whites could neither dictate to Indians nor ignore them, because at some point they needed the Indians' help, or they needed the indigenous people's help in order to survive the climate. So what did they do? They pretended to be friendly for a while until they got the ropes and learned the ropes and learned how to grow their food and all those other things, and learned some of the language and learned how to get over the diseases that were in the new climate. And then they proceeded to repay all of this kindness and friendliness and neighborliness with genocide. That's how they repaid them. Native Americans often resisted encroachment upon their lands through diplomacy and warfare. But vulnerability to European pathogens, frequent betrayal, and constant warfare began to decimate the indigenous American population. Slowly, Europeans began to establish their towns and cities. They began raising crops and families. In turn, European countries demanded more raw materials from their colonies. To meet the growing European demands, the North American colonizers increasingly turned to the answer called slavery. Now, what makes all of this so interesting is that the very methods and processes that the Europeans used to begin to colonize and take over the Americas, they now feel that same sense of being taken over by, as they say, black and brown people. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, who did it first? And the reality is, you really can't stop what's going to happen. You might slow it down. You might delay it a decade, maybe at the most, but you can't stop it. And unfortunately, we're seeing the result of people who realize it cannot be stopped. They are taking it upon themselves to wreak havoc on towns and on cities. So, that's all we have for you today. Something to think about. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that if you are seriously interested in understanding some of the history and patterns that you see happening in our society right now, I absolutely recommend you get Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi. It is the definitive history of racist ideas in America, but he actually starts in Africa and traces it all the way back. And The Color of Compromise by Jemar Tisby, the truth about the American church's complicity in racism. He is tackling the Protestant and evangelical part in it. He does not cover the Catholics, but he does cover Protestant and evangelical. All right. I want to thank you for your time and attention on Facebook Live. If you want to, you can join us for our after chat. I'm leaving the link so you can meet us on Periscope and hear what our live audience has to say. Take care and God bless.